or four-year kinds of challenges that they need to embark on once graduating from the community college. The guiding part has to do with the advising and the support that we provide to students along the way. So this program today, that you'll hear more about from Donna in a moment, is right, kind of front and center in our minds, because when you think about guided pathways, that's exactly what we'll be talking about today. It's going to be a pathway that provides a lot of support and guidance along that track for our students. So we are really excited to have you here today. Let me just get a show of hands. How many of you are here from a community college? Awesome. How many of you are here from a high school setting? Awesome. Almost half and half. This is excellent. So we are really excited to have you, and I want to introduce the star of today, Donna Rogalski. For those of you, we have many stars, superstars up there, but Donna Rogalski pulled the whole program together, so we wouldn't have these other superstars to bring you if it was not for Donna and all the work that she did to make this event happen. Donna has also led all of our college readiness now grants, and as many of you know, we are now in the fourth round of funding. So we have a $1 million grant from the state of New Jersey to work on college readiness now programs. And one of our areas of focus this year is trying to encourage colleges and high schools to find ways to bring accelerated learning programs that you'll hear all about today to your students. So we're doing this work at the college level for many of us across New Jersey and across the nation. This has been something that's been in existence for a little while, although we have the founders of this approach here with us, so that's really exciting. And now we're going to talk about how can we modify that and adjust that so it might even fit in the high school setting. So I'm going to turn it over to Donna. Please join me in giving her a huge round of applause for all the hard work that she's done in this area.
Just a few logistical things before we get started. I just want to make sure everybody has a copy of the agenda. If you don't, we have some out in the vestibule area. It does have the Wi-Fi password on it as well, so you can use your computers. It is going to be an interactive day, so feel free to log in on your phones, your computers, whatever you're using. We're going to start the day with our presentation from our consultants that have come here from Baltimore. And then we're going to allow you some time to kind of break out into your discipline-specific math or English. So we'll be separating the room for you to have some more time to focus on your discipline area. And then the afternoon is really going to be about kind of putting this into action. The goal is for you to leave here today having learned a little bit more than maybe what you knew when you first came in, but also leaving with a plan of what to do with that information. That's really our big goal, is that you leave here with some action steps that are attainable, that you can actually start working on, I don't know, this afternoon. So just want to make sure everybody has that. Also, our presenters have given a co-requisite model handout that was out in the lobby as well. If you didn't receive that, that will be helpful as they walk you through the presentation. And then also for those who may need CEUs from the college setting or professional development hours from K through 12, we have that paperwork too that we'll collect at the end. So you'll get that at the completion of the program. That paperwork is out in the lobby as well. Okay. So I'd like to introduce our guests. We're actually standing in the order that I have. That's fun. So I have Susan Gabriel. She's the director of the Accelerated Learning Program at the Community College of Baltimore County. She has more than 20 years experience, which is a lot that. Teaching developmental writing and also an associate professor of English. She has taught all levels of composition. In her role as the Accelerated Learning Program Director, she has made presentations and conducted workshops at many, many national conferences. So we're excited to have Susan with us today. Next, we have Peter Adams. After 36 years of teaching at the Community College of Baltimore County.
She didn't say I don't look like
No. You're very dapper. He actually retired in 2014, so congratulations, Peter. For the past 5 years, he has traveled extensively around the country presenting on the Accelerated Learning Program to individual schools, to statewide gatherings. He's also conducted faculty development workshops for schools that have decided to adapt the ALP model. And then we have Jesse Kiefner. His current role is Associate Professor of Mathematics at the Community College of Baltimore County, where he also serves as the director of its Accelerated Mathematics Program, also known as AMP. In addition to leading the acceleration program, he teaches a variety of face-to-face, online, developmental, and credit-level mathematics courses. So welcome to our guests.
I want to have it ready.
So I'm going to,
Do we need it for recording, the microphone? Yeah, sorry, Peter.
all right, so now I don't have any free hands. So I'm Peter Adams. I taught at the Community College of Baltimore County down in Maryland for 36 years, recently retired. And during those 36 years, I taught basic writing, developmental English, almost every semester. And at the end of every semester, I would have this feeling, well, that didn't go so well. But next semester, I know what I did wrong, and next semester I'm going to get it right. And I managed to do that for 36 years. Never did get it right, but we got it better, I will say that. But all that time, I always thought that developmental English, for people who needed developmental English, and I feel the same way about developmental math or reading, that developmental courses are the most important thing we do in higher ed. It's the most democratic. It's the place where the American dream is still alive, where people who otherwise, if it weren't for us teaching those developmental courses, could not do college. And so it's very important, and it's important to our students, but I think it's also important to our nation. I think we need to work on renewing the American dream and giving everybody hope that they can achieve their dreams in America. And so I think the work we're doing, the work I did, was very, very important. The program I developed, Accelerated Learning Program, is an English program, which I just turned off. This is nice. I can see it in the back. That's good. Usually, when I'm presenting, I have to turn around to see what's on the screen now. Thank you, whoever arranged that. Middlesex, I guess. And anyhow, we developed this program 10 years ago now and achieved remarkable success. I'll give you some data in a few minutes. But we also, as Christine mentioned in her introduction of Susan and I have been traveling around the country proselytizing. We know of about 300 schools, mostly community colleges, some universities, that are doing ALP. I'm proud to say that not one of them, as far as I know, is doing it exactly the way we do it, and we think that's just fine. That's one of the strengths of the program, is that it's very malleable, and you can tweak it to fit your local conditions, just not too much. But I also have to admit that in Baltimore, ALP has only been a college level program. We have not yet sought to cooperate with the local high schools. And so when Christine invited us up here to come to this conference, we were very excited to hear that the idea that you might, and so we haven't done it. We're going to tell you how we do it at the college level, and we're hoping by the end of the day today you have all figured out how you could take the program and tweak it a little more and make it a cooperative program between colleges and high schools. So I hope, and then I hope some of you will come to our conference next year and present on how you did that, and then maybe Maryland will finally get around to doing it. All right, so we have a very simple agenda for the day. Only 2 items. First, we're going to talk about the problems that we discovered actually back in 1993 with our approach to developmental English, and then the solutions. That's it, 2 things. Let's start with problems. So in 1988, the college bought the English department its first computer, and we used it. We knew one computer, and we had like 600 students, so we knew they weren't all going to be able to take turns writing on the computer. We knew we didn't want to have them do grammar drills on the computer, and so we finally used it to set up a database in which we entered every student's placement data and their grades in every English course they attempted for 4 years. So we had like little mini transcripts for every student who was ever assessed in English. And so based on that data, we did what we called a longitudinal study. We wanted to say, of a group who started in a particular cohort, we used the cohort that started in academic year 88-89, that was 863 students. How successful were we with them? And here's what we discovered when we first ran the data. we discovered that 57% of that year's cohort passed. In those days, the English course was pass-fail, so they got an S, a satisfactory in the course, and that, of course, meant 43% never passed the course. And that didn't look too bad. And then we wanted to know, okay, well, when they passed and when they got to English 101, how'd they do? And much to our surprise, a whopping 81% were successful in English 101. That was a higher success rate in English 101 than students who were placed directly into English 101 got it, and that, of course, left 19% who were not successful. I need to say that these data, we followed the students for 4 years, and so lots of the successful students in either of the two courses might have taken more than one attempt before they passed it. It doesn't mean that 57% passed the developmental course on the first try. So we were pretty happy with those data, 81% success rate. I started thinking about how could we get it up higher? How could we get it to 90, 95%? And it occurred to me in a sort of cynical way that I knew how we could do it. We could just raise our standards in the developmental course so that only a few students, the very best students, got out. And they would go and 100% would pass English 101. But of course, the other 98% would have failed. And then I began to see the problem with this analysis, that the 81% who got an A or a B or C in English 101 was not 81% of the original 863 students. It was 81% of the 287 plus 68, the 300 and some odd students who actually made it far enough to take English 101. But it didn't account for all the ones that dropped out along the way. So we took the same computer and the same data and organized it in a different way, and this is the way we now look at our data from our program. 863 students started in the academic year 88-89, the same 57% passed, but here was the first really startling data. Only of the ones who passed, only 355 out of the 490 who passed ever tried English 101. 135 students never failed anything. They passed the developmental course and gave up at that point. And never, and when I say never, I really only mean for 4 years. That was how long we studied them. But never even attempted. Even though they'd passed the developmental course and were eligible, they never even attempted English 101. That was a real eye-opener for us, and that was actually the birth of the ALP program, that little box right there with the red square around it. And then we started thinking about it even more, and we were thinking about the students to the left of that box, the 373 students who are in a box that we labeled never passed 099. By the way, I'm using the numbers 099 and 101. That's actually not, 099 wasn't the number we used, but so we're trying to come up with, you may number your English 101 class differently, but you know what I mean. And 099 is the developmental course one level below English 101. So of the 373 who never passed 099, those of us who teach that course knew a surprising little secret. In fact, that box used to be labeled failed 099, and we changed it to never passed because they didn't really fail. Most of the students who didn't pass the developmental course didn't pass it because they gave up during the semester and stopped coming to class. And I used to say, if I still had half of my students by Thanksgiving, I was having a good semester. And so, in fact, what we discovered with the red box students, that they really dropped out. We saw that. They never took English 101. But most of the students who were in the unsuccessful box to the left also dropped out. And we began to see what the problem was. But we still want to get to the final box. How did they do in English 101? And what we discovered is, of the original 863 students, only 33% ever in 4 years passed English 101. And that was a real eye-opener to us. That was, needless to say, a lot lower than we were hoping for. And that meant that almost 2/3 of the students who we placed in our upper level developmental course. We also had a lower level one that had even worse results. But for the upper level course, 2/3 of the students would never pass English 101. That was the problem. That was the problem ALP was invented to address. But we also we had lots of time to think about the problem, and we did some student focus groups and some student surveys, and we were trying to answer the question, why do they drop out? Why is that the problem? And so we were a bunch of English teachers sitting around my dining room and speculating, and we came up with things like this. This is why they're unsuccessful. And we asked students in focus groups and on a survey or two to tell us if they had to drop out before the end of the semester, what might be the reason. They've said, well, none of those things. The reasons will be things like this. We kind of lumped that group of things under the general title, life issues. And that's the biggest category of reasons they gave us. But there was a second category. Not as many students mentioned this, but it was the second largest category of reasons they gave us, and it was things like this. I want to start with this first one. I heard this over and over and over during my 36 years of teaching developmental English. Students would come up to me and say, I'm just not sure I'm college material. I always wondered, where did they get that idea that some people are and some people are not college material? I always do now I have to hold this mic you're making me use. But anyhow, they start with this insecurity about whether they belong in college or not. You know, nobody in my family ever went to college. I'm not sure I belong. Some people call it the imposter syndrome. And of course, when they arrive, we give them, at my school, the nasty acuplacer. And what message do we give them? Oh, well, we're not so sure you're college material either. In fact, we're not going to let you take college-level courses. You're going to have to take these courses that are a lot like the courses you had in high school or earlier, and then maybe we'll let you in. So we just reinforce their doubts about whether they belong or not. But they also mentioned other things like these as possible reasons. In this group of reasons, we've put under the term affective issues, and if you add those together, life issues plus affective issues, we're going to use the term non-cognitive issues as the umbrella term for all of those. And I'll be using that term during the next few minutes, so I wanted to start by explaining it. One other thing that we discovered, we thought about, this is the part of my talk that works just as well for math as it does for English. Just imagine you have a credit course at your school, and you do a little investigation, get some data, and you discover that for a certain range of students between certain cutoff scores on some test, for that group of students, only 50% pass. And you're not happy with that. That's not good enough. You want to get more than half of your students to pass the credit course. So what do? Well, probably the same thing we do. You say, we'll get a developmental course on the books that will get them ready so they can pass. So we do that. Now suppose we do it, and the pass rate in the developmental course is 75%. All right, that's pretty healthy. We're making progress, right? And suppose of those 75% of those students, 75% of them take the credit course. And suppose in the credit course, you have a 75% pass rate. What have you done to your overall pass rate for that group of students? A little math problem here. You've lowered it from 50% to 42%. So in trying to create a system that will improve your success rate, you've actually made it worse. And you've added another semester of work and another semester of tuition to what you're requiring those students to do. That we call the pipeline problem. And because the longer the pipeline, the more opportunities that students will drop out of it. All right, enough about problems. Let's talk about solutions. This is a student who wrote this comment in an end of the semester evaluation of her course, and here's what she said. I'm really a bad writer, but my English teacher thinks I'm a good writer. So this semester, I wrote really good papers so she wouldn't find out what a bad writer I am. Isn't that wonderful? Clearly, she's a good writer. She wrote that. But I thought about that long and hard, and I think part of the problem with our traditional approach to developmental English is what we're saying to students, we really think you're a bad writer. That's the message they get, whether that's intention, whether that's what we mean to say to them or not, when we put them in developmental courses for which they pay college tuition and get no college credit, and which feels a lot like they're back in the 9th grade or earlier. So we're trying to find a way that we as an institution can say to students, we think you're a good writer. We think you can do college level work, and see if, in fact, they produce college level work because we believe in them and we support them. So that's, in a nutshell, what ALP is. Here's how it works. Oh, well, first of all, the overall term, co-requisite is the umbrella term, and the co-requisite umbrella covers a variety of different models which are on the handout that we gave you this morning and which I will talk about for the next few minutes. But basically, a co-requisite model, a co-requisite program, is one in which the developmental course is taken as a co-requisite to the credit course, not as a prerequisite. You don't have to take the non-credit developmental course first and pass that before you're allowed into a college level course. You're allowed into the college level course, and whatever form, and different in different models, the developmental work is, that you're taking at the same time. So ALP is one co-requisite model, and it's the one that we developed and the one I will talk about first. I think I'll just be honest with you and say, in my opinion, and I think Susan shares it, it's the most robust model. But some of the other models might be a little less robust. But if that's all, what we say to everybody is, if you can't do the strongest model, but you can do one close to it, don't say, oh, if we can't do ALP, we're not going to do anything. Do the best model that your college and that you believe in. And you may decide some of the other models actually, you don't agree with me that this is the most robust one. That's fine. But anyhow, I'll tell you why we think it's the most robust. But first, here's how it works. A student arrives on our campus and is given, and we do a lot at our school that we're proud of, ALP, AMP, we're proud of, lots of other things, but our placement system is not one of them. We're still using AccuPlacer after all these years. We're working on changing it. Anyhow, the student takes the nasty AccuPlacer, and she is told, you need developmental English. And however, there is another option. If you want to, you can do ALP. And if she chooses that, then she registers for a section of English 101, an ALP section of English 101. And in that class, now our class size for all of our writing courses is 20 or less, as you're about to see. And that's, we're pretty lucky. A lot of colleges have larger class size, but for us it's 20. She's placed in a section of English 101. She's joined by 9 other students who are also developmental. The AccuPlacer says they belong in a developmental course. So those 10 students are in the course. They're joined by 10 students who the AccuPlacer says are ready for English 101. So it's a class that's half 101 level students and half developmental students, and of course a teacher. And then in the next hour, the little red-capped developmental student signs up for an ALP section of English 099, where she's joined by the same 9 other developmental students and the same instructor. Now that means that those 10 students, the developmental students, are spending 6 hours a week together, half of that time in a very small section with only 10 students, and all of that time with the same instructor. And it has some just wonderful benefits. And I'll give you the data on those benefits in just a minute, but first let's just talk about why it works so well. First of all, we think it's important that students are in a credit level course. In our case, it's English 101. Important because when they arrive with that idea that they're not college material and we keep them out of real college courses, we reinforce that sense that they're not. And so by putting them in, they're really in English 101, it improves their attachment to the college. It allows exposure to stronger role models. Now, I'm not claiming that the purple 101 level students are all wonderful writers. Certainly they're not, but some of them are pretty good writers, and we think the idea of taking all your weakest writers and putting them in a section where everybody else is equally weak is a sort of crazy idea for how to help students become stronger writers. So we like, and also they learn something about doing college. The the 101 level students are more likely to know how to ask for help, to know how to fill out a FAFSA form, to know, what a bursar is and so forth. So we think it's helpful that they're in a student. We also think it's helpful for the course that at least half the section is 101 level students, in that the instructor will not be tempted to water down the curriculum, to water down the standards for the course, because it's a 101 level course with 101 level students. It sort of keeps the system honest. We think a major benefit of this model is the cohort effect, which we stole from people who are doing learning communities out at Evergreen University in Washington. And it just means that those 10 students are taking 2 courses together. Most students at community colleges don't know anyone. They get in their car and drive to college, take 2 or 3 classes, get in their car and drive to work. So this sort of makes it possible for them to form friendships and bonds. And it really does work. They call each other when somebody misses class. Somebody will call them. If they're late for class, they'll text them and say, are you going to be here in a few minutes? They'll share notes. They'll even work the next semester to try to arrange their schedules so they get to stick together. Not all 10 of them, but in as many of them as possible. The small class size is no doubt a major strength of this model, especially if you want to work on students with non-cognitive issues or with individual problems with writing. To have only 10 students is just a dream. Having the same instructor means the 2 courses are carefully coordinated, that what goes on in the developmental class is always structured to prepare students for what they're going to do next in English 101, and having the same instructor means the instructor knows what we're going to do next in 101. And similarly, that's one of the major things we do. Another major thing we do in the 099 is reinforce what they just learned in the 101 class. So it works to both prepare them for stuff in 101 and to help reinforce and answer questions that maybe didn't get answered in the 101. We have developed, this took us some years to do, but we now have some ideas about pedagogy, about how to teach. Just an example, we're very big on active learning. So that's one of the things that we do. We're very big on helping students with critical thinking, trying to improve trying to get them to just recognize that a major component of good writing is good thinking. And some of our students, that never occurred to them before, which is, I think, why they write papers about drunk driving is a terrible thing. Because they don't have to think. I mean, they know they'll be right. It is a terrible thing, and so they prove the obvious too often. We've worked really hard on this, integrating reading and writing, and we now officially have done it in the ALP courses, which now have a new name. They're called academic literacy courses, because it's reading and writing, that happened under Susan's leadership, not mine. I worked really hard to bring that off and was unsuccessful. It wasn't easy to do, but we really think that it makes no sense to separate reading and writing. For years, our developmental students at Baltimore County, the Community College of Baltimore County, went to their reading class and learned to identify the main idea in a paragraph. And then later they went to their writing class and learned to write a paragraph with a topic sentence. No one ever told them that topic sentence and main idea were the same thing. They were just different names for it. So that kind of separation was just crazy. And I don't know why. Well, I have a theory about, does anybody in the room know why in so many community colleges we've separated developmental reading from developmental writing? Anybody have an idea about that? I have an idea, which I'll be glad to share with you, even though it's probably not true. A cynical idea. And it's this: in the early days, we would get 3 scores from AccuPlacer, a placement score for English, for reading, and for math. And so we thought we had to have 3 courses to put the students in. Now, I don't know that that's the reason. I have no data to back that up, but I love having one more thing to blame on AccuPlacer. So you said I could do it. Integrating reading and writing is not easy. You have two different faculties who've spent their whole professional careers. A few have taught both, but most of them have taught one or the other, and it takes some faculty development and a lot of compromising and so forth, but it can be done. We think that one of the reasons our program is so successful is we consciously recognize that we can't solve all of those problems that students told us might make them drop out of school, but we can help with some of them. We can talk to students. We try where possible, for example, to integrate teaching them to write and teaching them and getting them to think about some of the life issues at the same time. So we had, back a couple of years ago when the Pell Grant rules changed, we had them do a little one-page research paper on the new Pell Grant rules. So they were learning how to do a little research, how to include quotations in their writing, how to write a citation for the quotation, and they were learning what the new Pell Grant rules were, which we wanted to make sure they all understood. So we work hard to try to address non-cognitive issues in the little ALP section. Having them for 6 hours a week, half the time in a small section, gives us plenty of time for individual attention, whether it's on non-cognitive issues or on grammar issues or on I can't understand this reading issues and so forth. The last thing about the model that we really like is that it's scalable. We started offering just 5 sections a semester, and now we're offering 106 this fall, sections of it. So we've scaled it up so that ALP is the way you do developmental English if you're not in the very lowest category, which I'll talk about in a few minutes. So here's the data. This is from a study by the Community College Research Center at Columbia, and they did 2 studies of us, a sort of preliminary one in 2009, but the 2012 study is the one with the biggest number of students in it. And for this study, there were over 5,000 students who took the traditional developmental track, and of those, 65% passed the developmental course, a little higher than it had been way back in 1993. This study was done in 2012. And for ALP, a much smaller group, because we started very small with just 5 sections and gradually scaled up, but there were almost 600 students in the study, and the pass rate was 82%. So we improved the pass rate for the developmental course, a nice hefty amount. And then there's this, remember back in the 1993 study, it was 16% of the cohort never failed anything but never registered for English 101. It was almost the same, 17% in 2012. Now folks, I wouldn't have driven all the way up here on I-95 yesterday if we couldn't improve on that. And we did improve on it. In fact, we improved on it so much we got it to disappear. We got it to 0. Zero. So 0 students drop out having passed the developmental course without even attempting English 101. How do we do that? Because we're wonderful teachers? No. Because we shortened the pipeline. They take the 2 courses simultaneously. There is no place for them to drop out in between, as there was when you do the developmental course in the fall and the credit course in the spring, where you can give up in January and go get a job. And for us, they take the 2 courses, they have to sign up for both, and if they drop one, they have to drop. So there's no way they could pass the developmental course and not attempt 101 because they take the 101 simultaneously, concurrently. All right, and so how about the final results? And what you'll see is we still have a 33% success rate for the traditional course and a whopping 74% for the AO. We more than doubled our success rate. And we didn't dream it would be that successful when we first started it. And it was just, and it's part of the reason why 300 schools around the country have adopted the program, because it has such dramatic results. You might be thinking, yeah, but are they ready for 102? Or you talk about all this bonding and the small class size, maybe those 101 instructors in ALP cut their students a little slack, and we have a high success rate because they pass students who aren't really ready for 102. And so we can move the graph over a little bit, and you'll see that actually Now, English 102 is not required in many of our programs at CCBC, so the percentage of students who take it is much lower because lots of students don't need it. But now we're tripling the success rate in English 102. So we wouldn't get those results if we were letting students pass the course who weren't ready for 102. Some other data. Does it have an effect on their long-term success in the college? What we found is we asked the question, what percentage of students earn 12 or more credits within 1 year after passing their developmental course? The green, of course, is the traditional students. 20% was the highest, the rest were in the teens. And for ALP, it's double. So not only is it helping their success in English, it's helping their success in staying in college in every sense and passing courses. And after 2 years, 24 credits, there's the traditional students, and again, just about double for the ALP students. And were you giving me a signal? You were tapping your arm. She was doing a tap. I'll talk a little faster. All right, Susan. It's the story of our relationship. Susan's constantly getting me to talk faster. Completion rates. We define completion as completing an AA degree or a certificate program of 30 credits or more. We don't have transfer data. Of course, that's a form of completion, but we haven't yet figured out how to get it in Maryland, although we've been working on this for a decade. But for the way we define completion, for students who go the traditional route, it's in the single digits, the percentage, except for the fall of 2007. Of course, that group of students has had the longest time to complete. And for ALP students, again, it's double every year except fall of 2008. We have no idea why we didn't have as dramatic a results in fall of 2008. That was a semester I was on sabbatical, wasn't it? Right, because of the recession, so maybe that had some impact on it. Finally, sometimes people say, well, okay, we're big, 34,000 students, urban Baltimore school on the East Coast. So what about other schools? If you look across the bottom of this chart, we got 7 schools to agree to share their data. This Achieving the Dream organized this study. It was done by a woman named Dawn Coleman, and they looked at schools that were small, large, medium, schools from various geographic parts, suburban, urban, small town, rural schools. And what we found was, again, all we're looking here is success in English 101 for students who were placed in a developmental course. The green is students who were placed in a traditional developmental course, and the purple is students who were placed in ALP. And you can see we're getting the same kind of results. It seems to work in a variety of contexts, and we were really excited to see those data. So the critical features, I already went over these, so I'll do it quickly now. The students are in English 101. The program allows exposure to the 101 level students, the cohort effect of taking 2 courses, the same group of 10 students taking 2 courses together. The small class size is very important. The teacher's ability to coordinate the 2 courses because it's the same teacher. The ALP pedagogy that we've developed, having time to address the integrated reading courses, reading issues, time for the non-cognitive issues, time for individual attention, and finally the fact that it's scalable. So those are the 10 items that we think, 10 features that produce those dramatic more than doubling of the success rate. Now, I want to say that our data may not be up to date, but we think that these 9 colleges in New Jersey are doing some form of ALP. Does anybody want to correct our records and say, yeah, what do you want to correct? Could you spell it for me? R-O-W-N. R-O-W-A-N. Rowan College. Thank you. 301 schools now, folks. Yes, right here. Ocean County. Good for you. Good for you.
And the reason we don't have your names is that these are coming off the ALP website, and schools will come on and register as if they were doing it, so I'll add you.
And right behind Ocean County? Sussex. Congratulations. Congratulations, yes. Middlesex. All right. Yeah, yeah. By the way, I came to Middlesex County more than 30 years ago. Somebody here organized a men's conference at Middlesex College, and people came from all over the East Coast here. It was not, there were men's movements that were sort of anti-feminist. This was a pro-feminist. It was trying to say, what can men do to support feminism? And it was right here on this campus. I saw a hand over here, another college. Yeah. Hudson County? Good for you. Wow. So I think we just got it up to 13. That's one more over here, yes. Rowan College at which county? Gloucester County. Are you separate from the other Rowan College? All right. Yes. Excuse me? All right.
So my question is, when you started the transition to ALP, and you had English 101 faculty starting to teach the ALP 099, did you have a group of reading specialists who were not teaching English 101? Was there a sense that this was boxing people out, or that you were now saying that all the hard work they had always been doing was a failure?
Yeah. First of all, no one is saying anybody's hard work was a failure. What we're saying is the model was a failure. Not that I admitted that every semester I would be disappointed by my results and vow to do better the next semester. So it wasn't that the individual faculty were a failure, but the model that they were teaching within was a failure. And so the question, I think, is a really good one. I'm going to broaden it a little bit. So I think you were focused on the integrating reading and writing part of it. But there are other issues, like some schools have a separate foundations department where reading and writing and math all are separate from English. So most of the English faculty have never taught developmental English, and most of the people who teach developmental English have never taught English 101. Those are all real problems, but solvable problems. And Susan's going to talk about some of those difficulties with integrating reading and writing, which was, I would say, for us, the hardest problem. It took us 10 years to scale up completely, and it was mainly because of that issue. So we don't want to sort of sweep those problems under the rug. They're real difficult problems. There are some, not here in New Jersey, I don't think. In some parts of the country, there are big credential problems about what kind of credential do you need to teach English 101 and so forth. But there are ways of working around those problems, and Susan's going to talk about them this afternoon. Yeah. That's coming next.
Doing a developmental math and a college math and a developmental reading English and a college English, were the dramatic results still evident? Doing both ALP English and math, are they getting overloaded, or are they able to cope?
But in the past, they had to do English reading and math. It was an even bigger problem. So we've lessened the problem. Yeah, for our developmental reading in English, there was a total of 16 hours they had to take before 101. And now for most students, it's 3 hours and you take it as a co-requisite. All right, yes.
At the beginning, thank you. I believe you said that when you first started doing this, that students self-selected if they wanted to be
Yes.
in the, and at some point you transitioned so that all of the students now
Yes.
do this?
Yes.
So do you think any of the, I don't know when that was, what year
That was about a year ago.
Okay, so I just, I guess it's too early to tell. I wonder if any of the positive results could be attributed to students' self-selection to do that program, that perhaps they were maybe more committed because they decided to.
In the
double
CCRC
up.
study that the data came from, they controlled for 13 different variables, like acuplacer scores, socioeconomic background based on their Pell Grant status, and also on the zip code that they lived in. Not the zip code, the census tract that they lived in. They're broken down by socioeconomic category, by gender, by age, by whether it was the first time or the second time they attempted the course. So they tried to cover, but now that we've scaled up completely, we're still getting the same kind of results. It's not, yeah, folks, Susan is looking at her watch, and I only have 4 minutes left. So I want to make sure you recognize there are other options. I just presented ours, but I want to real briefly present a bunch of others. So what I view as over on the least robust end of the scale is a reliance on technology. At its worst, what this means is you say, all right, we'll let them all into English 101, and if they need help, they can go to the computer lab and work on some technology product. That is a terrible model, and I'm not recommending it, mainly because we really believe that much of ALP's success is because of the human-to-human contact, the small class size, the ability to get to know your students as real whole people, and that no matter how good the program is and how clever it is and how adaptive it is, it doesn't help them with a lot of their issues. So, for example, you don't have the cohort effect. You don't have all 10 students they go to the computer lab on their own. Why do I keep doing that? My thumb's getting big. You don't have the small class size. You don't have the coordination of the two courses. You don't have the ALP pedagogy. You don't usually address reading issues or non-cognitive issues or deal with students as individuals. So in my view, that's the weakest model, although there are schools that have used it and strengthened it a lot more. So one of the things that strengthens it is if you just say, if you have any trouble in this course, go to the computer lab and work through a Pearson product or something, that's not, but if you require them to go, and if there's somebody in the computer lab that can help them if they need help, then it gets to be a stronger model. There are other versions of the tech model involving online work and online writing centers and so forth. So I don't want to condemn it completely, but in its purest form, I think it's not a very strong model. Something called compressed courses. In a compressed course, you have a section of 20 all developmental students. The first half of the semester, they do the developmental course. They meet 6 hours a week, and they do the developmental course. In the second half of the semester, they do English 101. That model, a lot of schools have done that, but it doesn't allow them any exposure to the stronger role models because it's all developmental students. You don't have any small class size effect. And I crossed out the 6, 7, 8, and 9 with a gray line. It could have enlightened pedagogy and integrated reading and paying attention. It could have all of that. Usually it doesn't. But if it does, that makes it a stronger model. Similarly is fast track, except the students don't, it's not 7 weeks of developmental and then 7 weeks. The whole semester, both courses are going on. They're sort of blended together. And that's much more like AMP, isn't it, Jesse? Merged, okay. Blended was I couldn't remember your word. And that's a stronger model, but still, you don't have the exposure to stronger students, you don't have the small class size, and you may not have time for reading in those 6, 7, 8, and 9. Studio approach. This was invented at the University of South Carolina. And it's where we stole the idea and their evidence we used to convince our school to let us have a section with just 10 students. Here's how it works. So you have a studio section. It has only 10 students, and it meets for 1 hour a week, usually with a graduate student at South Carolina in charge of it. People come to that course from a variety of different sections. So if they're in an English 101 and they need support, they go to the studio for 1 hour a week. But not everybody who needs support is a developmental student. So some of them are purple students. Remember, they're 101 level students. And even some of them may be in a Psych 101 and are having trouble with writing assignments. So the studio course is a mixture of people from a whole hodgepodge of different courses. And what they do is they work on their writing together. But the model doesn't allow for the cohort effect. There might be 1 or 2 students from the same section in the studio model, but not all 10. It doesn't allow for the coordination of the 2 courses, since the people in any individual studio section could come from a whole bunch of different courses. And it probably doesn't allow time for the 6, 7, 8, and 9, we'll call them from now on. Next model up is the ALP version with 2 instructors. So we'll just change the instructor for the developmental. Why do people do that? Because of some of those credential issues. Schools where the developmental courses are taught in a separate department from English, sometimes they can't find anyone willing or qualified to teach both the developmental and the 101, so they go with 2 instructors. We think that's not as robust a model because the coordination is much harder if you have 2 different instructors, but the other features are there. The triangle model. Triangle model is being used. Anybody here from Atlantic Cape? Yeah, you're using it still, right? All right. If you disagree with me, grab a mic. Here's how it works. You have 2 sections of English 101, say one at 9 o'clock, for example, and one at 11, taught by the same instructor, and 1 section of the developmental course, and the 10 students, although I think for you all it's 8 students, right? 8 students from each of those courses goes over into the developmental course. And do you do it like this, the sandwich approach, where the developmental course is in between? Okay, so here's what I think are the reason this is not as robust a model as the Baltimore version of ALP. One, you don't have the small class size, that you have 16 in your developmental section. And secondly, I have real reservations, and this is where you can really correct me if it's not true, about how scalable it is. Because notice that you'd use the same instructor for all 3 sections. That's really important if you're going to coordinate what's going on in them, and if you're going to get to know the students really well. And that means that you have to have instructors who can teach 3 blocks in a row. And if one of the sections doesn't make because of under-enrollment, what do you do then when you can't? And when you scale up and you have adjuncts teaching these sections, how does the department chair, how does Richard make it work? And does it work? Have you scaled it up? Yeah. So I want to talk to you all at lunchtime about that. I want to hear a little more report on that. Georgia Gwinnett College in Atlanta was one of the first. There are 3 schools that I know of, Atlantic Cape, Middlesex, but not here, the one in Massachusetts, and Georgia Gwinnett in Atlanta that are doing the triangle model. Georgia Gwinnett abandoned it because of the scaling up problem. They couldn't handle it as they tried to go to 100%. So small class size and scalable are the 2 things that I'm arguing you lose. And then there are versions of ALP that meet either 1 hour a week or 2 hours a week. And again, we think if you're going to cover all of this stuff, that 3 hours a week is not enough time, but that if you go to 2 hours or only 1 hour a week for the developmental course, you're probably going to not have enough time to also cover reading, talking about non-cognitive issues, and much time for individual attention. People have argued with me and said, we do it 1 hour a week and we have plenty of time. But I don't have enough time when it's 3 hours a week, so I have trouble believing that. So that was a quick run through. I wanted to say one other thing. At CCBC, we have developmental writing. 65% of our incoming class, on average, are placed in developmental writing. Of those, 87% go into the upper level course, and only 13% go into the lower level course. And anyone who's in that upper level course, that 87%, is eligible for ALP. When we started, there were people who said, people meaning me, who said, I was just about to point to that screen, but that won't. That we ought to limit it to people at the upper end of the accuplacer range. And a guy named Bob Miller argued with me about that and said, Peter, if you don't let all of the 87% of the developmental students in, you'll never know whether it would have worked for those at the lower range. We did let them in, and now we know. So here, our ranges are 57 and below, you go into the lower level course. That's only 13% of our students. 58 to 89, you go into ALP. And so we divided into 3 tiers, the students who scored 58 to 69, the middle tier, and the upper tier. And we looked at how each of them benefited. We compared people with those Accuplacer scores in the traditional sections versus in the ALP sections. In the traditional sections, we found, and again, we're defining success as passing the developmental course and English 101, and we found those success rates. And for ALP, we found these success rates. Again, double the success rate. But what was really interesting is, look at the upper group. Their success rate went from 33% to 65%. It almost doubled. 2.0 would be double, but it went up to 1.96. For the middle group, it went up, it more than doubled. It went up by 2.14%. And for the lowest level, it went up even more. So what we learned from that was that ALP has a stronger effect on improving success rates for the lowest level students than for the upper students. And if we ever had to limit it, do triage for some reason, we would give the priority to the lower level students, because we're going to improve the success rates, not by much, but certainly they're all in the same ballpark, and any argument for eliminating the lowest level students sort of disappeared once we got these data. I just want to say, this lower level course is one that many schools have not addressed very successfully, and I would recommend that you give it a lot more thought. My thinking, after looking at the data on the students with the lowest Accuplacer scores in ALP, I would put those students into ALP also, but my school never listens to me, so we've never done that. Yeah? I somehow... Yeah. Yeah, we do not do that, and we would resist that mightily. We resist Accuplacer as a placement tool, and certainly to make, I mean, then would we start teaching to the Accuplacer? Would that, yeah. Yeah. No, we use success in succeeding courses and success in college as our measurement of success. Multiple criteria. I'm running way over my time, so I really just have one more slide I wanted to show you, and it's this one. I want to just point out that teaching in a co-requisite model, and I showed you a whole bunch of different ones, is very different from the traditional standalone, you have to take the developmental course first, and if you pass, then we'll let you in 101. So what do you teach in the developmental course? Well, you say, all right, typically what do our students need that they didn't get in high school or middle school, or maybe they got it but they've forgotten it because our average student age is 26. And so we look back towards what they're missing from that we expect them to know when they arrive in college, and that's how we decide what to teach in that course. But in the co-requisite model, so the goal of that course is to get students ready for English 101. In the co-rec model, like ALP, the goal of the course is entirely different. It's not to get students ready for 101, they're in 101. The goal of the course is for them to pass English 101. And so what you do is you look at English 101 and you look at, remember if you have the same instructor in both sections, what are your students struggling with? What are they having trouble with? So that the objectives for the ALP developmental course are very much overlapping with the objectives for English 101. You're just doing them more slowly with more opportunities for revision and more opportunities for scaffolding and so forth. But you're no longer, we call this backwards curriculum design. We look at 101 and design the curriculum for ALP backwards. From the question we're asking is, what do they need to pass English 101? And that's usually quite different from what we think they should know when they come, like take the 8 parts of speech. They never tested on that in English 101, and yet lots of us I spent years trying to get my students to know the difference between an adjective and an adverb. But that is not a skill they need to pass English 101. Folks, I want to apologize to Jesse because I've run over, but we did start 15 minutes late, so I didn't run over all the...
We don't have to stick to this.
Oh, well, in that case, I have some more slides.
We're flexible here, so I want to make sure people, if they have questions, they can.
All right.
So let's do a lot of individual questions.
Yes, absolutely. We'll have time to talk.
Okay. Is there anybody with a question that they really feel pressing they want? Jesse's going to do a similar presentation about math, And then we're going to have an hour for questions and answers. So, but if it's something pressing, I see it's pressing back there in the back row.
Now I don't know if it's pressing, but
You want to know where the restrooms are.
I want to know if there's more coffee. No, this is just a question because it comes up in our school, high school though, differently. But do you ever measure how this affects the kids who were originally placed in the English one, the purple kids?
Yeah, yeah.
Because
yeah.
I always feel like in our school district,
Yeah.
those kids aren't addressed. I'm just curious.
Yeah,
if
yeah,
they're-
and we addressed that because we were concerned about it. And Community College Research Center, when they did their very rigorous study, actually followed the purple kids. I know they're blue but in my computer they look purple. The 101 level kids, and they evaluated them on something like 13 different variables, like grades in English 102. How many credits how many of them graduated. And of the 13 variables, there was one in which they were slightly lower than purple kids that were in non-ALP sections. So basically their answer was, and they say, that could have been just an outlier in the data. And so they reassured us that it was not having any negative effect on those students. Yeah, good question. Anything else really pressing? All right, Jesse. It's all yours.
All right, let me switch presentations. Hi, again, my name's Jesse Kiefner. At CCBC, I like to say that we have a little bit of an identity crisis as far as acceleration goes. Acceleration under the reading and English side we call ALP, so Accelerated Learning Program. ALP started many years before our math acceleration did. So when the charge came to the math department to create some sort of accelerated math model, we probably should have just stuck under the name ALP because it's an accelerated learning program, but we wanted to be different and called ourselves AMP. So the goal is the same, but when we refer to ALP, we're talking about English and reading acceleration. When I refer to AMP, same idea, but math acceleration. I want to look at the handout you guys picked up when you registered this morning, the one called Co-Requisite Models. So we use mainly one model at CCBC. Let me just backtrack a little bit. But there are many different math acceleration models across the country. What seems to be happening now is there's some sort of state mandate to offer some sort of co-requisite model, and then each college comes up with some sort of acceleration model that best fits their needs in their area. So there are many different things going on right now. The first model on that handout is called, we labeled the Accelerated Learning Program, or the ALP model. So the way we do acceleration in terms of math at CCBC is a little different, but there are some schools across the country doing math acceleration in the format that Peter was discussing. So with math, acceleration would involve sequential courses, so maybe intermediate algebra and college algebra. At CCBC, we also accelerate developmental courses. So we might get students through pre-algebra and introductory algebra to developmental courses in one semester instead. So the ALP model would consist of teaching college algebra to a group of students, maybe half of which are ready for college algebra, and the other half may have actually placed into intermediate algebra. So in the ALP model, those students who placed into intermediate algebra would then have additional support outside of class. So some schools are doing that, where we're teaching college algebra to a mixed group of students, and then there's a support course that meets with that group of intermediate algebra students, sometimes the same instructor, sometimes not, and provides that additional support. In talking with people who have done that, they've gotten it to work, but I think the biggest mistake with that model is having that support course after the college algebra meeting. Sometimes that's overlooked. So schools that have gotten that to work are schools that have that support course meet before the college algebra session. So with intermediate algebra and college algebra, you might have that week a 1-hour support course going over factoring skills before they meet with the college algebra course where those factoring skills might be needed. So that works well, I think, if the support course meets before the credit course. I think all of these models tend to work well if you get the same instructor to teach both. So you have a stronger connection with the students, but in some cases that's not possible, especially if there are credential issues. So if there are different instructors, it's just communication is key. Chatting, communicating between those two instructors to ensure that you're both talking about your students on a regular basis, who's doing well, who may need additional support. The triangle model I don't see often in math acceleration. Number 3 in this handout is the compressed model, I think. Oh, sorry, were you guys able to hear me before? The compressed model, I think many colleges do already without maybe calling it acceleration. The compressed model is 7 weeks of the first course followed by 7 weeks of the second. Many colleges in Colorado are using that model. So there might be intermediate algebra the first 7 weeks of the semester followed by college algebra the second. There are benefits and challenges to that model. Again, I think if you can get the same instructor to teach both of those courses, it tends to work really well. The challenge with that model is if students don't pass that first 7-week course, then they're not enrolled in the second 7-week course. The model we use at CCBC is number 4. It's called the merged model. So in the merged model, we have one large set of students. So if we're talking about intermediate algebra and college algebra, we are teaching one group of students who all placed into intermediate algebra, or maybe they placed lower and are now ready for intermediate algebra. So we might have 23 students who are all at the intermediate algebra level, and we're teaching them intermediate algebra and college algebra at the same time. Many of those details we'll look at in our breakout session, but we have one instructor teaching this sort of giant 6-hour course. I keep referencing intermediate algebra and college algebra, but we do the same thing for developmental courses. So we might take all students who place at the lowest developmental course level, so pre-algebra, and put them into a merged course that will cover pre-algebra and introductory algebra topics, all in the same semester. And it's not taught in that compressed model form where we're doing 7 weeks followed by 7 weeks. When we were building AMP, we sat down and we thought, how could we sort of stretch out that upper level course so it feels like we're teaching them college algebra, or it feels like we're teaching them introductory algebra with a lot of review built in. So we laid out all of the course topics and figured out how could we mix these topics together so that it didn't feel like we were teaching this course during the first hour of class and this course during the second. Yeah, many of those sort of nuts and bolts we'll look at during the breakout session, but when we teach AMP at CCBC, we're teaching one sort of large 6-hour course. We're jumping back and forth between the two courses the entire semester. And then we still keep grading separate so that it's not an all or nothing scenario. So these math courses are 3 credits each. With an accelerated math course, we're talking about 6 credits, 6 hours per week. So we didn't want it to be sort of an all or nothing scenario, especially because of financial aid implications. We didn't want students losing 6 hours or failing 6 hours. So we still keep all of the grading separate so that if a student at least reaches the lower level competency, they can at least pass that lower level, and then maybe the following semester just work on completing that upper level course separately. So the merged model, we'll get into more details a little later. The other model that is sort of growing in popularity is the technology model for math number 7. I know Peter mentioned not being a fan of technology for ALP. I think technology is really promising for math. How many math people in the room? Okay, good. How many of you have used Alex? And keep your hand up if you liked it. Okay. I don't work for McGraw-Hill. I'm not earning money from them. I also teach part-time at a for-profit college whose name I can't say, but it's a very popular business college whose commercials you probably see and radio ads you probably hear. But I know for-profit colleges have a stigma sometimes associated with them, and sometimes for good reason, but there are other cases where they do really good work. I think sometimes for-profit colleges tend to be ahead of the curve as far as technology is concerned. So I teach an evening class once a week at this college, and they use a technology model. They use Alex. At the community college, before I taught Alex at the for-profit college, did not like Alex at all. For college algebra, we have a McGraw-Hill book. It came with Alex. The instructors could use it. Maybe they didn't. It was their choice. And I think it was just the implementation and lack of training. Alex is a very sophisticated program, and if you don't know all of the quirks, you're probably not using it most effectively. So at the community college, I and many of my colleagues couldn't stand it. But when I used it at the other college, it was just implemented much better and works really well. So what they do is, if you're familiar with Alex, you start with the upper level course. So if we're talking about college algebra, they have these lists of just topics and objectives. So you go through and you pick out all of the topics or objectives related to the college algebra course. And then the program determines what developmental topics are needed to supplement those upper level topics. So the first day of class, students are taking sort of a pre-test. And based on this pre-test, the program figures out what developmental topics are their sort of weak areas that they need to work on for the upper level, the college algebra topics, to make sense. So there might be, say, 200 college algebra topics, and the program figures out that they have 50 sort of different areas, or there are 50 different developmental course topics that they need to work on for this college algebra material to make sense. And I found that in using it for a few years now, it's really good at predicting what developmental course topics they need. So with technology models, and particularly the one at the other college I'm teaching at, they have the students take this pre-test during the first night of class, and then there the classes are 4 hours a week, one night a week, and it's the same across every section of the course. They have the instructor teach to the college algebra course and give time in class for support of the lower level topics. So if you use a technology model, I think it's really important to have that in-class time for the computer support. Now there's challenges there with computer labs, so you'd have to have lab space available, but it works really well to teach about 25 to 30% of the time to the upper level course, and then giving the other 70% or so of the class time for students to actually get in the program, do their work. And during that time, I can jump around and sort of help students individually. Some are meeting the college algebra topics. They were placed into college algebra. They may even finish the course before it's over, depending on the setup and the flexibility you allow. And others, may need all of that developmental coursework, and you're there providing one-on-one support for them. So I think technology models for math work really well if there's many details and time given to the training and implementation. So let's see how much I can get through here. This was the plan. I was going to go through nuts and bolts and data this morning through 11, and then some of the other pieces during our breakout session. So let's see. To give you an idea of what our math department looks like, we have 3 levels of developmental math, what we call 081, 082, 083. So 081 is pre-algebra, or basic mathematics we used to call it. 82 is the introductory, that second level, and 83 is intermediate algebra, the third level. Up until last year, in Maryland, students needed to be competent in all of those courses to get to any 100-level math course. We've since changed and sort of caught up to the times, knowing that students don't need most of what's in intermediate algebra to have a good shot at statistics. We've since changed to allowing students to go directly into statistics or our liberal arts math course, as it's usually deemed, if they're at the intermediate algebra competency. Our liberal arts math course is Math 125. It's finite math. It's just in Maryland we found that, we have finite math topics in it, of course, but we found that it transferred better if it was called finite math versus something else. Our math department is pretty large. We have about 50 full-time math faculty across 3 campuses. 40% of our courses are taught by full-time faculty. These are courses, not people. And 60% of our courses are taught by part-time faculty, which is consistent with those taught in AMP. And this gives you an idea of the number of students we saw this past spring in multiple formats, so online, accelerated, the sort of traditional one course at a time path. I think we've spoken enough about AccuPlacer. So in comparing ALP and AMP, the biggest comparison is the model. So with ALP, we have that sort of support course for the developmental students that meet separately. With AMP, we are seeing all developmental students all 6 hours. They're not at sort of multiple levels. They're all at the lower level. And I should have mentioned earlier, too, that we have accelerated other courses. We've just scaled back for reasons I can get into during the second hour here, but we did have a introductory and intermediate algebra accelerated course that met for 6 hours a week, and all of those students were introductory algebra students. It worked really well. It just, for us, it seemed it was best to streamline. We had so many different options on the schedule. We were sort of competing with ourselves, so we've scaled back a little bit. Let's see. So many of the reasons behind math acceleration are similar to the reasons behind English and reading acceleration. About 70% of our students, when they come to CCBC, place into a developmental course. The traditional success rates, so success rates 1 semester at a time for our traditional math course, our traditional math courses is around 50%. So about 50% of students taking intermediate algebra pass intermediate when they're taking it 1 semester at a time. 50% of students taking pre-algebra pass pre-algebra, just 1 semester at a time. We also had some influence by the government a few years ago. Senate Bill 740 stated that we had to create pathways to ensure that students completed both their credit level English and credit level math course within their first 24 hours, including all of their developmental coursework. So it's hard to tackle that without some sort of accelerated model. I like to include this slide. We have a dean who's since retired, who at every meeting would try to remind us that when we look at these numbers, these numbers are people. So at CCBC, in 2010, if we looked at 100 first-time students in 2010 who started at the lowest level developmental math course, so the 100 incoming students who started at the pre-algebra level, these are the facts at CCBC. 68 of those students were minority students. 51 lived below the poverty line. 67 are part-time students. And 52 are working. Of those 100 students that started in 2010, less than 10 of them passed a credit level math course. How many do you think of the 100 ultimately made it to graduation? 1, 0? A little better than that, 3. I used to think these were actually CCBC students until Susan pointed out that there's a palm tree in the background. So we didn't sort of have a state mandate. We in the math department sort of had what we call the dean mandate. So in fall 2009, after seeing many of the presentations given by Peter, our dean at the time came to the math department and said, we need to try something different. This accelerated model is working really well for English. Do you think we could do something for math? So the dean at the time was very flexible. He had said, just try something. How can we get students through 2 courses in 1 semester, 2 sequential courses in 1 semester, without sort of sacrificing the quality of the course? We weren't trying to cut corners. That would not have gone over very well with our math faculty. We tried different things. With the exception of the technology model, the others on the paper we tried. And for us at CCBC, that merged model worked the best. In terms of administration, the merged model works really well too, because we didn't have to create any new courses. We were taking 2 existing courses on the schedule and merging them. These are all the different options we started with. And again, we had so many options, we were competing with ourselves that we scaled back on introductory algebra and intermediate algebra, and then intermediate algebra and applied algebra. The applied algebra course, because our college algebra course doesn't have trig, that applied algebra course is kind of like college algebra with trig included. The reason that one was scaled back was because there were program changes. We used to have more programs requiring that applied algebra and trig course, and there were changes over the years. Not as many programs required that course, so we couldn't get the course to run, so we've scaled back and just since focused our efforts on the pre-algebra, introductory algebra course, and then the intermediate and college algebra course. And this just gives you a visual of the sequential courses we're focusing on. So maybe I'll run through data. Can I run through the data and then we do the breakout? Okay. So this data was compiled by our dean. I have other data compiled by our Planning, Research, and Evaluation Office. So in fall 2011, we looked at students over a 2-year period. So in fall 2011, these are students who are starting at the lowest level. So starting at the Math 081, the pre-algebra level. Now, I said 1 semester at a time, our success rate's around 50%. So over 2 years, about 59% of our students are able to pass pre-algebra in that cohort that we tracked beginning with fall 2011. Of that cohort, about 49% enrolled in the next math course, Math 82, the introductory algebra. Of that original cohort, 30%, less than a third of them, passed that second level developmental math course, the introductory algebra course. About a quarter of them, 25%, enrolled in Math 83, intermediate algebra, and this was during a time where they had to do all 3 levels. They didn't have the option of going right to a credit level course at the time. And then of that original group, only about 15% who started at the lowest level passed the third developmental math course, and less than 5% of them enrolled in a credit level and passed a credit level math course. I'm not sure why our dean put less than 5 and not the actual numbers there, but that's how it was given to me. The 81-82 AMP column looks at students who in fall 2011 started with the accelerated model. So they were taking introductory algebra and pre-algebra together, same semester, same group of students, same instructor. So 74% of the students who started in an accelerated path passed pre-algebra. Now, naturally, the next number is going to be 100% given the structure. 100% of them are sort of forced into 082, the introductory algebra course, so there's no surprise there. But about 54% of that original group passed Math 82, the introductory algebra course. And we had checked these numbers so many times to see the 2% here be the same and then the following 2% here be the same. We were concerned about, but we had checked the numbers so many times that that same percent, 54%, of the original cohort that we were tracking, 54% enrolled in Math 83, that third level developmental math course. And then that same percent enrolled in a credit level math course, and then 27% passed a credit level math course. There's always work to be done. 27% of students passing a credit level math course that start at the lowest level still makes me sad, but in comparison to less than 5% of students having to take these courses one at a time, we made a lot of progress there. Sometimes people are interested in just success rates one semester at a time. I think it's more powerful to track students over periods of time. But these are success rates of traditional Math 081 students compared to those that started at the accelerated Math 081 level. And then the final two columns look at students the success rate of students who took introductory algebra Math 82 traditionally just one semester at a time compared to those that were in the accelerated course. In semesters where the percentages were similar, we seem to think that's when we scaled up, and we were scaling up at different times. There was one semester where we really scaled up with the 81-82 course, and then another semester where we really scaled up with the intermediate algebra, college algebra course, and we didn't realize how important at the time training was when we scaled up, which is a piece we'll talk about in a little later in the breakout session. We scaled up, we added all these accelerated sections, and we weren't doing a good job at making sure that our accelerated math instructors knew the goal behind the design, the integration. We found that many of our instructors were teaching the courses separately, so teaching the one course the first half of the semester, followed by the other the second half. We think that mixing the courses together, mixing the content together, motivates them to stick it out. This is for intermediate algebra and college algebra. So same idea, we looked at students who started in fall 2011 at the intermediate algebra level. 65% of the students following the traditional path, one course at a time, passed that intermediate algebra course within 2 years. So again, one semester at a time, that pass rate's around 50%. When given 2 years, about 65% of the students who started in fall 2011 passed. Only half of those enrolled in a credit level math course over the next 2 years. And then of that original group, about 40% passed any credit level math course. So that's college algebra, that's statistics, or maybe that's one of our math for teacher courses. That's any 100 level math course. When we looked at students who started at the intermediate algebra, college algebra model, 81% of those students passed intermediate algebra. Now again, naturally the next number is going to be 100%. We're forcing all of those students to take college algebra that same semester. And of those students who started with the accelerated model, 65% of them did pass college algebra. And I'd like to point out here that college algebra, in terms of the opinions within our math department, college algebra is probably one of our hardest 100 level courses that a student can take after intermediate. So 65% of students are passing what we think is one of our most challenging 100 level math courses, where that 40%, that 39.6 in the other column, is the success rate across all 100 level math courses. So some of those students could have been taking finite math, a course we think is probably our easiest math course. So to see 65% pass in the course that we think is one of our most challenging 100-level math courses after intermediate algebra. Was exciting. This is that intermediate algebra and applied algebra course we ran, and I had mentioned there were changes in program requirements, and we've since scaled back. That we saw our highest success between those two courses. The reason we think is because the courses really were best connected. So in intermediate algebra, we were doing a lot of algebra. In the 135, the applied algebra course, we were doing all of the applications to sort of justify the algebra. So we were able to do applications and algebra at the same time, which I sometimes think in our traditional path seems disjoint. We do semesters of algebra, and students ask, when are we ever going to use this? And you might do a little application here and there, but they don't really get to see a lot of that application, at least at CCBC, until they get to their 100-level math courses. So these courses really meshed well. We were doing algebra application at the same time the entire semester. So these are our success rates there. We looked at African American students at CCBC. So under the traditional column, for the population at CCBC, the entire population, I had mentioned that these success rates are around 50%. So success rates among African American students in pre-algebra is lower, around 43.5% there. So introductory algebra, 44.7%, and so on. So to interpret the numbers in the AMP path column here, the 66 and the 66.7 are the percent of African American students in the pre-algebra introductory algebra accelerated course that passed. So 66% of African American students passed pre-algebra when they were in the pre-algebra introductory algebra accelerated course. Now the second number is a percent of the previous, which is why it's a little higher here. So of those that passed, 66.7 of them passed the introductory algebra course. And then similar for those two numbers in the middle where you see the 50.5 and the 58.7. So this was when we had that introductory algebra and intermediate algebra course running. 50.5% of African American students in an accelerated course passed introductory algebra, and of those that passed, about 59% passed the intermediate algebra course. And then the last two numbers are for the intermediate algebra, college algebra accelerated course. So about 50% of students, African American students in the intermediate algebra, college algebra course passed, and of those, about 80% passed college algebra. Yeah, we still have, like all of us, work left to be done. It seems that when we compare people among themselves, they do better, but we still have achievement gaps, and you'll see this in a little bit. We still have achievement gaps between white students and African American students in AMP. They're doing better, but there are still gaps when you compare two different groups. These next few slides are data analysis that were done by our planning and research office. So the next few slides look at students who started at the lowest level. So all of the data I'll show you in a moment are students who are starting, they're coming to CCBC, they're starting at the pre-algebra level. So this is over a 2-year period. So when we look at fall 2011 data, these are students who started in fall 2011 and passed within a 2-year period beyond that. So the blue bars there are students who started in an accelerated model, and the red are what our analysts just refer to as sequential or traditional, one course at a time groups. So about 71% of students in fall 2011 passed Math 081 when they started with the pre-algebra introductory algebra accelerated course. And then of those, about 50%, about 50% of students who started in fall 2011 taking pre-algebra by itself passed the course. And the numbers are similar down the line. So in fall 2012, incoming students who placed at that lowest level pre-algebra course, about 73% of them passed pre-algebra. And then when we look at the group that started in the traditional path, about 55% passed. Does that make sense? These are still those students who started at the lowest level, and then the percent who passed that second course, introductory algebra. So students who were tracked in that original cohort who started in an accelerated path, about 43% of them passed Math 082, that second level developmental math course, compared to 23%. So this is all of the original cohort. When we look at the original cohort that started in fall 2011, about 23 of them passed that second level developmental math course doing the traditional path, one course at a time over the next 2 years. These are Math 083 completion rates, so how many of them actually completed that third level? And in all of these cases, that third level was required at the time. So you can see the percent of students still looking at that cohort who started in fall 2011 at the lowest level. About 38% of them in the AMP path passed intermediate algebra, compared to about 15% in the sequential. Math credit completion, this is defined as the percent of students who completed any 100 level math course. So you can see the percent of students who started in the AMP path who ultimately completed a credit level math course versus those taking them one at a time in the red there. These are the percent of students who had earned credits. So it was defined as 12 credits. So students who started in an AMP path at that lowest level, about 79% of them over the next 2 years had earned at least 12 credits. So 12 100 level or above credits versus 70% of developmental students taking the courses sequentially. Awards are tricky to define at CCBC. So many of our students will complete a few classes at CCBC and then they just want to transfer before earning an associate's. So we consider those students a success, but on paper they're not. So for us, awards are just defined as people who stayed at CCBC, earned an associate's degree or some sort of certificate or credential that we could track. So students who had started with an accelerated path, about 9.3% of them ultimately earned an award, so some sort of degree or certificate, compared to 5.5% who started sequentially. Fall 2012 is interesting. That was a busy time in the math department. We did a lot of scaling and I think very little training. These are pass rates when we look at African American and white students. So the first set of bars there are pass rates looking at cohorts, so those who started in fall 2011, fall 2012, and so on. African American students who started in an AMP path versus those who started in a sequential path, one at a time. And then the final two set of bars, white students who started in an AMP path versus white students who were taking the courses one at a time. So you can see generally comparing African American students to African American students and white students to white students, the AMP students are doing better, but we still have gaps between the two groups. This is a similar analysis looking at those students who passed that second level, that introductory algebra course. And then the next set of slides are similar, but now we're looking at students who started at the intermediate algebra level. So students who came to CCBC, it was their first semester, they were placed into intermediate algebra, that third level. So these are pass rates for that third level developmental math course for both AMP students and sequential students, so the traditional one course at a time group. And then these are, so Math 163 is our college algebra course. So these are pass rates of the college algebra course. When we look at students who did the AMP model, so they took intermediate and college algebra the same semester, versus the red, where they would have taken intermediate algebra the first semester, followed by college algebra the second or the third, or sometime within that first 2-year period. And then these are the percent of students who within those 2 years had earned 12 or more credits, so 100 level or above. And then the percent of students who had received some sort of award that we could track. And then same comparison looking at African American versus white students, looking in terms of AMP and the traditional path. And then same presentation here, but then the pass rates of the college algebra piece. Looking at, so the first set of bars being the AMP path and the second set being the sequential path. The scaling we'll get into, well, maybe I can talk about it briefly. We'll discuss a little more in the breakout session. I think at CCBC, ALP sort of beat us. In terms of scaling in the math department, we're not at 100%. I think in our math department, there's a sense that we probably shouldn't be at 100%. There may be cases where we think 90% is attainable, so maybe for pre-algebra and introductory algebra, looking at those lowest level students, we really think we can ramp that up because they have a lot to face. They have a lot to work through. So we think we can increase those offerings, but it's been a challenge, as we've seen over the past few years, to really scale up and get our sections to fill. Many of our students coming to CCBC are part-time, so we can't put them into both an ALP and an AMP the first semester. There's just not enough hours in their week for them to do that. And what we found is that ALP might be the better recommendation, the better starting point, because developmental English and reading courses will more commonly block them from 100 level courses across other disciplines versus developmental placement in math courses. So many of our advisors, for good reasons, will recommend an ALP course as their first course during their first semester over AMP. If their placement's lower in math than it is English or reading, then they might recommend AMP first as the starting point, and then ALP second. Later this afternoon, I'll show you a program we designed that helped advisors sort of determine what might be best in different cases. So these numbers give you an idea of the percent of the sections on our schedule that are accelerated. So here, the percent of 081, so 081 is our pre-algebra course. These are the percent of that lowest level developmental course that are accelerated. So this past spring, we were around 27%. 27% of the pre-algebra sections on the schedule were accelerated. If we can increase that number, we will. But again, it's been a challenge given that most of our students are part-time and can't start in both an ALP and an AMP sort of path the first semester. The rows below are the percent of 83 sections, so intermediate algebra sections that are accelerated. So this past spring, about 16% of our intermediate algebra sections were accelerated. That's a little lower because intermediate algebra students might be going into other courses. They may not need college algebra, they may need other courses. So I think the building piece is probably what we should do in the breakout session. Did you guys need to? Okay.
I'll let Donald come and talk to us about the next steps, but if you could please join me in thanking our fabulous rock stars in front of you, the ALP, AMP
you.
rock stars. I mean, it really is such a treat for us to have these national experts right here in New Jersey for us. And we are, especially thankful to our funder. So our funder is the Office of the Secretary of Higher Education through funding that has been approved by Governor Christie. So really appreciate that money that is getting devoted to college readiness that is allowing us to put on today's program. So I'll let Donna go ahead and take it from here.
So what we'll try to do, we're going to modify a little bit of our day, which is great, to allow you some more discussion in your specific area of interest. So on this side of the room, we're going to have those who are interested in exploring English. And then on that side of the room is going to be those who want to focus more on math. Okay? And then we have within that 2 areas of interest. You're either at the startup. So for those who are here at the high school thinking about maybe starting this up with your community college partner, you don't have to sit by specific colleges or schools if you don't want to. You might want to mix and mingle and meet other people. And then you also have the opportunity to sit in the area of scaling up. So maybe that's expanding it at your current existence, or scaling it up, meaning you already do it at the college and you're going to bring it to the high school level. Okay? So allow you some time to kind of divide up the room. And then Jesse will be with math, and Susan and Peter will be over here with English.
Yesterday we had a brighter, I don't know what. I think we'll come back to the close-up. And I can keep playing. It's just not ideal for me. I was hoping it would be. Let's see what we got. Let's see if it would work. It's probably not going to work great. I mean, it's going to be okay. But the best thing to do is come back to staging. Hey, Serge. We're recording the individual segments too? No audio. Yeah. Oh, okay. I don't think so. I really wrote this. I'm not really hear what you're saying.
Was about college students at the college.
Okay.
Now we want to shift our focus to looking at these models and how we can take these models and either teach them at the high school, teach them, continue to teach them at the college, but include high school students, or a little bit of both. So this is the discussion that we want to have, but I wanted to see if you had but what questions are lingering that you might want to tap on that or ask you? Questions about
It works pretty well with college algebra. In college algebra, we looked at our course outlines and our syllabi and tried to figure out how we can teach these topics. Because we felt like a really large college algebra course with all this things to do. So we stretched out the college algebra topics.
Okay, so the question is, how do you use physical space when you have a smaller number of students and you need classroom or classroom? Is anyone currently doing how do you do that? How are you finding classroom space? Who's doing it already and how are you doing it?
That was a little more challenging.
Yes.
It was hard to teach some of the introductory algebra content first, and then piece in the algebra content.
You have a larger class size. Right, okay. Right, that's how we, okay. Okay. One thing we did at CCBC that you can think about is that Peter literally went from building to building on the very students, looking
Do a
for
lot of
what
mixing
they
major
need.
teams.
So what we were thinking about for our out class was to have what we consider to be like a seminar room, so it could be a smaller classroom. In some cases, we ended up putting like a seminar table, sitting around the table, and we had laptop computer cards in the room. So the students had access to a computer, but they were also in a setting where it would be like you are right now, sitting around the table.
Monday, Wednesday, Friday courses, so we might do courses that are 2 nights a week for 3-hour blocks. We do work with the high school, so we have dual enrollment or parallel enrollment. So many of our students at the high schools will come on campus, which is a benefit that they can come on campus and take some of our accelerated math courses on campus. And we've done some partnerships with mostly private high schools. Some of the partnerships with public high schools are just beginning, where we are having CCBC instructors go to the high school and actually teach the EM course at the high school. You guys, where are you at with the sort of high school partnerships and acceleration? Yes. Okay.
I am going to give each
Third year.
paper and some markers, and I would like to start working on this worksheet.
Okay.
Now,
problems tonight because Alex is telling me I need to. If you guys haven't used Alex, I think you might have to take a technology route. Probably the best adaptive software sort of supplement that. With our high school partnerships, we had five, yes. So we used to use my math lab. We've since switched most of our math courses to open source textbooks. Using my open math, right? I do. So we've taken textbooks that are online, written by other math faculty across the country, and then modified them to fit with our math courses. And so we now, in all of the developmental courses, and a few of the credit, but not all of them, have open source books that we use. We used to use Pearson in my math lab, and they are really helpful in sort of supplementing the lower level course topics in certain areas. So a selling feature that we used for these accelerated courses was that they only bought the book for the upper level course, and then the instructor supplemented all of the lower level course topics. So my math lab will help with that supplementation without any sort of additional costs. So if you're familiar with my math lab, you know that you can create assignments and pull from other textbooks. So we use that feature to sort of supplement that lower level course without having to rely So it's in the bookstore. Each instructor has the option of what they want to do. So do you want to use the traditional paper pencil homework, or do you want to use the technology? So in the bookstore, they either get the Alex code by itself or my math lab code by itself to get the electronic access to everything. Or they buy just the textbook if they have an instructor who doesn't require the technology piece. Or they can buy the module if they want both. But yeah, it's all paid in the bookstore instead of actual fees. So we didn't place any registration blocks. Any student, sorry to shush you guys like a teacher. Any student who places at the lowest level, any student that places at the lowest level is eligible to take these AMP courses. We had thought about placing restrictions, like should we look at students who are just placing at the upper level range in this active placement score. We found that it just comes down to the same basics. Are you willing to work, do your homework, study? It's just those same basic qualities that we look for in many types of students that are in discipline. We did away with any sort of registration blocks. If you're eligible for that lower level course, we welcome you to the course. I mentioned that topics are integrated. We do require them to stay in both. They can't withdraw from one or the other. Because we're mixing the material together, I'm teaching both courses pretty much until the end of the semester at any given time. So I can't have students withdraw from one course and stay in the other because I can't sort of predict at what time I'll be spending on what topic. The biggest benefit of this model is that there's that overlap in course content, usually from one course to the next. And it's that overlap that gives you sort of this built-in extra time. So, for example, when we had the introductory algebra and the intermediate algebra course, we taught factoring in both courses. So because we're meeting with the same group of students, I no longer have to teach factoring twice. Normally we spend about a week or two in introductory doing factoring, another week or two in intermediate. That overlap gives me extra sort of built-in time. Usually with these AMP courses, we have this extra at least a week, and often 2 to 3 weeks of sort of extra built-in time that we're not using to teach the same thing twice. And it's that extra time that's so important. We use the time to review for exams or do group work. I often sort of turn into an unofficial mentor. You get to really know the students well during these 6-hour setups. You'll get to know them better than any other group of students you probably had, unless you've met with groups of students for 6 or more hours about them. And even if you consider yourself sort of a private instructor that doesn't divulge as much information about yourself, they tend to get to know you better and ask you a lot of questions that may make you uncomfortable at times, but it's all in good spirit. I usually end up giving them advice on what course they should take the next semester, or if there's some sort of challenge they're experiencing outside of their coursework, some sort of life issue. I can talk to them, just lend an ear. I have all the extra time to do this sort of stuff now. Whereas when I'm teaching college algebra one semester at a time, I'm applying for that course so fast, there's so much material. I barely have time to get to know the students like I do with the accelerated model. So that is one catch in the grading. We do say that for a student to pass the upper level course, they have to pass the lower level course. We did that because of issues in other disciplines. So some of our developmental courses are prerequisites for science courses. So we have a statement in the syllabus that says if you somehow manage to pass college algebra, but fail intermediate, both grades convert to an F. And we sort of had to do that because of our own internal rules and guidelines. But it just never happens. Of the thousands of students we've had over the years going through here, and there's probably been 3 or 4 times that's happened. And in those cases, it's usually some outlier, some sort of case where a student maybe missed a test in the intermediate course, and that's what's pulling their average down and they're passing college. So usually in those cases, because they're so rare, we ask the instructor to work with the student if they can. But yeah, they can pass the lower level and fail the upper level. That certainly happens quite a bit. We don't want it to happen, but if they pass the lower level, fail the upper level, then the following semester they're just then taking the upper level course. Online registration may be a challenge. If you go to a model like this and you have trouble with the online registration piece, send those questions and concerns to me. Our registrar, with all of the consultations we've done over the years, our registrar has become sort of an expert in these overridings, and not just the banner system that we use, but the other systems and other colleges. So in the beginning, we couldn't allow online registration. Sorry, guys. I'm going to shush you again. Oh, yeah. So they changed the schedule. I'm going to go through this a little bit. Yeah, just the talk So, yeah, there'll be some time. We'll probably have like 15 or 20 minutes or so. So the online registration piece may be a challenge. The initial AMP sort of setup required students to register in person the first 2 semesters, and we were really concerned about that because the person doing the registration in person had to override the fact that they were taking the upper level course and didn't have that lower level course prerequisite. So the first couple of semesters they had to register in person. Those students, because they may have been more proactive, are not included in the data that you had seen. Those were the semesters during the pilot that we were requiring that face-to-face registration. But we've since figured out how to override those things. So you guys use Banner or another system? Banner. What is that? Web Advisor. Yeah, if you decide to go this route, then you need help sort of figuring out the overriding steps on the prereq issues, then reach out to me. I can put you in contact with experts at CCBC or different like that. The number of students per class is the same. So at CCBC, we have around 23 students per class. So it's honestly just because many of our classrooms are pretty small. If they were larger, we'd probably have more students in some of these groups. So in our traditional classes, we have 23 students in each group, a max of 23. Sometimes 27 if the group's bigger. Usually no higher than 27. So for the accelerated course have 23 students in both sections, we're seeing 23 on average at the same time. That was a concern. You know, you have a group of students, and you need to figure out where they're all at. But that overlap in course topics, that naturally built-in extra time that you have, does give you a lot of time to reach out to the students one-on-one. And we call these family-style courses because the students tend to, because they're getting to know each other so well, they tend to sort of help where they can. As I'm working with this group of students, there's a set of students helping the peers at the other table. Like, even if you're not an instructor that sort of forces group work and every instructor is doing their own thing, the students, with that 6 hours per week, they're so friendly with one another after the first week that they start to help each other out, even if I'm not asking them to. Yeah. We don't have round tables. All of our math classes are scheduled in rooms that just have rows of tables. We have different campuses. There's one campus that has a lot of those single desks with a chair attached to it. So we don't have round tables. We reserve the computer labs for statistics courses, so all of their AM courses are taught in the traditional classroom, rows of tables, or the second class. Oh, sure. 1 second. Let me see if there's anything else I should touch on. Yeah, sorry, our schedule got out of whack. The English folks, I have a joke like to talk too much. The grading, hit on all of this. And so the biggest piece was we didn't want to cut any standards. We have a final exam that's given in all of these courses. So a question came up, I think, for concern about English earlier. Do you have them then take the academics or again at the end? In math, we have all of them take a common final exam in traditional or accelerated classes. So it's intermediate algebra, no matter what format, they're all taking that same cumulative final at the end. So they're all taking the same final exam. It's graded using the same standards. And all of the same course rules apply. So in our math department, we tend to have quite a few rules. The main one is that 85% of the course grade come from proctored assignments without notes and books and things and friends. So 85% of the grade essentially is tests without notes or assistance. It's just an internal rule that people came up with in our department. So we apply those same rules in terms of the grading for the accelerated classes. In terms of testing, it's broken up. So if it's intermediate algebra and introductory algebra, I might give them a test where it's all mixed together, and I'll label this as a Math 82 problem, this is a Math 83 problem, and then I'll have to separate the grading. I might grade the 82 problem in the purple, the 83 problem in the red. They'll have 2 scores at the top. I've since moved to more of a side-by-side approach. So here's the test for this course, here's the test for this course in a separate paper. They might be given during the same day. I might break it up if I can. So it just depends on what course I have. If I have time, I'll try to separate the tests for different days. I think just to give everyone an overview. Right. Yes. Just the one common assessment. We used to have common assessments in all of our courses that have since done away with those. Once we threw in the 85% rule, we got rid of the common assessments during the semester. So it's probably best to give you guys time to talk, and I can jump around and talk to you. They asked you to fill out this form to discuss if you think this model might work in your scenario or not. If you wanted to, I know I asked some of you to shift around so you could all hear me, but if you wanted to, maybe we could break up the group. Do we need more of, to maybe do one of these scaling ups? You guys starting up.
broad question, but what actually happens in your 099 English support class?
Is this on? All right, so the question is, what do we do in a developmental out class? And again, this is, I'm going to specifically talk about English. So the key to a co-requisite program, whether it is math or English, is the fact that the two courses work together. So what makes the out model important and working for students is that the students are taking English 101, and they're going to have 3 extra hours each week to be working on what's happening in English 101. So if you're looking at what do we do in that class, we are going to do a variety of things. For one reason is that we have 10 students, so we can custom design that class for the students who are sitting there. But sometimes we might do a writing workshop, working on a draft from the 101 class. Our integrated reading and writing out now includes a lot of difficult, complex, college-level texts that we're asking our students to read and interact with. So the out students might take extra time working on those readings. I might design something special for the students who are struggling with organizing an essay, how to work on the actual text of an essay. Some students are struggling with doing citations, quotations, and so forth, so I might spend extra time on that. So the class becomes whatever it needs to be in order for those 10 students to be successful in English 101. But we are not following, we have a list of skills, and the list of skills are the skills that the student would have needed to have passed our old developmental course, the standalone. They get separate grades, yes. The learning objectives blend together because if you think about our standalone developmental courses had learning objectives that were the lower level of getting ready to take English 101, right? So that still remains the same, those same objectives. And it's true that there are going to be some students who are not going to pass English 101 the first time, but they may pass the developmental course, which means that they would take 101 again by itself. Every student who's in this does not pass both classes. The majority of them do, but they don't all, okay? So I know that just sounds kind of nebulous, but to me it's really an organic thing, where you are really focusing for the students who are in there on what they need. And some semesters I'm going to be doing more work with respect to sentence structure. Sometimes I'm going to spend more time with critical thinking, or helping them to read and understand the text better. Yeah.
I want to give the best answer I ever heard to the question. It came from a student in Michigan who, in her end of the semester evaluation of the course, one of the questions was, how did you feel taking 2 Englishes in one semester? And she wrote, I don't feel like I took 2 Englishes. We just got the deeper version. Yeah, I love it.
That's really, that's what everyone needs to kind of wrap their head around when you talk about co-learning. It's not 2 separate courses. It's 2 courses that are working together, even though the students are getting 2 grades. But the other thing to think about is that the out course, the developmental course, has no life without the English 101 course, that they have to be working together. Yeah. Oh,
Let me just ask a follow-up question. Is it possible for you to fail the 101 course but get an A in the ALP section? I mean, how is the grade determined for if it is a separate grade?
Yeah. Well, the grade's determined as any grade in any class is determined as whether the student has met. We don't have a standard rubric, but when you are a teacher, you have ways of assessing your students that are based on your learning objectives. And we don't have a common exit scheme. But the question you're asking is, can someone pass the credit course and fail the out course? Okay. And that has happened on rare occasions at CCBC. Is that what you're asking? Oh yeah. Okay. Well, okay, good. So yes, there are students who advance enough that they have covered the skills that they would have had in a developmental class, all right? And that they can pass that class but not pass English 101. And when that happens, then they will take 101 over again, but not with the support class attached. Okay? Yes?
Could you address the,
Oh, sorry. Yeah, I don't see the microphones. Okay, sorry.
Another question about the ALP class. So I understand what you're saying about customizing the activities for those 10 students. Could you say more about how you feel like that process replaces the sort of reading class curriculum, which methodically maybe teaches people how to read? How does this more improvisationally?
I think what would be best, and we're not really going to do that today, is that we have side-by-side syllabus that show what's going to happen in the 101 class, and then that same week what is going to be done in the 05 in the out class. So if you will contact me, I will send you what those look like, and I think that will help you. I mean, we're not teaching reading, and we're not teaching writing. We're doing both together because they are skills that obviously work well together. So, am I talking about customizing? That's just a nice part of it, that you know what your students need and you can actually give them what they need. But there's also, everybody has an assumption that there are a set of skills for 101 that the students will be mastering in order to move on to the rest of their college career.
It might help. The side-by-side syllabus thing is something we developed to work with other schools, but it actually is a way we now recommend that people teaching out do their syllabus. So people teaching out or teaching a 101 section, they know how to do that, so they can just make out their schedule. When I say syllabus, I don't mean the part where you explain your plagiarism policy. Just the schedule of what you're going to do. You schedule that out for the 101 section. And then to the right of it, you say, okay, in week 1, class number 1 for the 101 class, here's what we're going to be doing. What can I do in the out section that will prepare them for that? Or what can I do in the out section that will reinforce that? And so that then when you get to the class and you find out that actually your students are having a tremendous problem with something you didn't anticipate, you sometimes have to throw out your well-planned class and do what they need. And that's when the tailoring, or sometimes some of them don't. So you'll send part of the class working with the 3 students who have a particularly unique problem. So you want to be very flexible about it, but that idea of looking at what am I doing next week in 101? What can I do to prepare them for that? Or what did I do on Monday in 101? What can I do Monday afternoon in the out to reinforce that? Sort of leads you to figuring out what to do in the out class. And it grows out of what's going on.
I was just going to address a question that was asked regarding the students who don't pass the developmental section of the ALP program, but pass the 101. And we had that when we first started with it. And what happened was we had students who were really figured out the system and said, all right, there's so much work here involved. I'm going to put my energies towards the 101 class and not towards the developmental class. So they didn't pass developmental, but they passed the 101. Then that became problematic because because we don't have all of our classes as an ALP, so what became problematic was the students who were taking a traditional developmental integrated course, if they didn't pass it, they could not go on to 101. So there was the dilemma. So now what we do is we average the grades between the 2 classes. They basically get the same grade for both their developmental course and their ALP course. And basically, it's, as you said, Peter, what we've done is we've looked at the activities and the assignments and the instruction that we're doing in in the developmental that mirrors and helps us scaffold what they're going to do in the 101. So it's changed around. So it's not that it's necessarily extra assignments, it's more in-depth understanding of the assignments that you're doing for ALP. So we don't have to be so grade-oriented in the developmental course, and that makes students, it addresses their needs to try to keep up with all the work, and also addresses the fact that they're not going to play the system. Thank you.
That's interesting, the averaging the grades together. One thing we really haven't said enough about today, and we're not going to dwell on it, but all of these reforms require attention to one important aspect, and that's faculty training and faculty development. That just sitting around and talking about these models is great, but you really need to have intentional gatherings in some way, or mentoring, or something to help everyone to understand how these models work. So faculty development is very important. The other thing, and the reason I'm talking about this is that at CCBC, when that passing the credit course and failing the out course happened, it was always because the teacher was not doing what we wanted them to do in the developmental. For example, the last time this happened, the developmental class was consisting of writing 4 different essays than the ones in 101. So the student figured out, I'm not, same thing you said, I'm not going to do those 4 essays in the 052 or in the academic literacy course. I'm going to concentrate on the 101 class. And so that is where the teacher, even though this teacher came to training, obviously did not understand how the model works. So it's a combination of helping people to feel comfortable and understanding how it works, but also there are schools that I've worked with around the country that have students sign a contract, or at least an information sheet that says, the reason you are taking this credit level class is because you are in this particular structure, and therefore you need to stay in both classes, and we're expecting you to attend, and if you pass, it will be, you can't drop one without the other and all of that. So that is another way to sort of focus in.
I want to add that concern comes up in math as well. We are really concerned about people passing the upper level math course and failing the lower level. We do provide a statement in our syllabi that says if that happens, both grades convert to F. And students panic, and instructors who are new to teaching panic. But it just is so rare. Thousands and thousands of students who have gone for AMP. We're talking about 3 or 4 cases where a student managed to pass the credit level and fail the lower level. Usually in those cases, it's because a student was absent during a test that you gave in the lower level course. You've really got to sort of have a special circumstance like that. Right, and then in those faculty trainings that we do, we encourage instructors to, if that does occur, work with the student, find out what's going on. It was a real concern in intermediate algebra and college algebra because our developmental classes have a pass rate of 70 or higher, where our college algebra course has a pass rate of 60 or higher. So you could get a D in college algebra and technically pass and earn your associate's degree, unless your program required that you have a C. So we were concerned because the passing threshold was lower in college algebra, but even so, it's just so rare that it doesn't happen. Should mention too, the data I showed you earlier, even though college algebra and those credit level math courses, students could pass at a D or higher. For all of the data I showed you to make the comparisons fair, we considered passing at 70 or higher for both developmental and credit level courses.
Any other questions? No?
You mentioned previously that most of your students are part-time students, so it would be very difficult to give them both supplemental English and supplemental math at the same time. What do you do for your STEM students, those that come in at STEM, who come in at the lower level math and are really locked out of the science classes without the math?
In those cases, we would recommend they start math acceleration right away, unless their English and reading was so low that it could, in theory, block them from other courses. Even some of our credit level math courses have those English and reading developmental prerequisites. So if they're really low, we might even push out first. But usually those students would probably be recommended to take the intermediate college algebra AMP course the first semester, and then they could jump into pre-calculus and calculus after that.
Okay, thank you so much for answering those questions. I'd like to move into now the next part is the power of partnerships. We
we are well aware that we cannot do this alone. So when we think about all the work that's involved, we talked about faculty training, we talked about the support, so maybe tutors, advisors. I want to try to get us a little interactive because I know our bellies are full. I'm not going to make you move. I'm going to make you move your thumbs, if you don't mind bearing with me. But if you could, bear with me, let me just pull this up. I'm going to ask you your thoughts on who are the partners in accelerated learning. So this is a live feed. So if you could go to menti.com and you can use that code that's up there. I'm curious, those in the room, who do you think are some of our partners who can help us with accelerated learning? It can be math, it can be English, doesn't matter which one it is. And I'd like to hear your thoughts. So if you go to menti.com, you can use your phone, you can use your laptop, you're going to enter that code and you're going to vote. You can do multiple at the same time. So it's a live feed right now. We got anything yet? Hit enter. Nope, you don't have to leave spaces, sorry. So 132988. Who are some of our partners to help? Oh, hello, tutoring. So it'll create a word cloud based on how, oh boy. I don't know what hi is, but I'm interested. Who are our partners? Who can help us achieve this? Who plays a part? Oh, look at counselors, it's really big. Hi is still in there. Hi is still, no. I think maybe some of you use multiple words, and that's the problem. It separates them out. It's a word cloud, so just try one word. Maybe it was supposed to be high school. Look at that, counselors is still pretty big. Parents, students, how cool is that? These are our partners. Passaic, a little shout out for Passaic in there. What I liked about this site is that it allows you to do multiple at the same time. It's a pretty cool website if you ever want to use it in your classrooms too, and it's free. And you can see at the bottom we have 45 people, 47 people participating. So as you can see, some of the suggestions from people in the room for who our partners can be. Our students, look at how big they're getting out there, right? We need them to take these classes, right? Our counselors might be the ones who are suggesting it to our students. We're really marketing it, letting students know that they believe in them, that they're capable, that they can enroll in these courses. We have advisors, parents, right? Especially helping parents understand how this fits. I think there's the tutors in there. I think I saw, oh, it's moving fast. Financial aid, I think. The curriculum, right? We need to develop the curriculum to allow for this, okay? So that can keep moving as we want. But I think what's really cool is that counselors, advisors, students, and parents are some of the big ones. And I know Jesse had some examples of how to share how the advisors play a role, but I just, again, want to note that we fully understand that this is not the sole responsibility of one entity. It takes all of us to be able to have an accelerated learning program take shape and come to fruition for our students and be successful. And that sometimes means that we have to serve more students, right? We're helping some of the students who may have not qualified for a credit-bearing class, who are now being encouraged to take a credit-bearing class with support. So that means kind of a change in how we teach them and the services that we provide for them. So I could probably keep going on forever. I got 70 people. That's awesome. So if you want to use this, menti.com, I discovered it just the other day. It's a pretty cool tool. So I'll let Jesse share with you what he has done in helping with some partnerships as well. Oh, I love that. Counselors, advisors, and students are kind of front and center.
Yeah, I'm so glad counselors and advisors was so big. We sort of underestimated at CCBC the importance of our counselors and advisors in the beginning. How many counselors and advisors do we possibly have in the room? Okay. Well, I'm sorry if this offends anyone, but we find that at least at CCBC, our counselors and advisors tend to be a little math phobic. AMP is not, well, was not the first thing on their list that they would recommend. So we found that connecting with them was very important. There was a lot of misinformation out there early on. The advisors, even though we had these information packets, really weren't well informed about ALP, AMP, the differences between the two, when's a good time to recommend one versus the other or both. So we had to sit down with people from all across the college. I actually attended advising meetings over the period of a year. Every time they met, I asked, can I come sit? Sometimes I gave presentations, and then sometimes I just sat there and answered questions as they came up. But information is so important, especially because advisors, at least in the college level, advisors tend to be overwhelmingly part-time, like many of our faculty. So there's sort of a disconnect. Making sure that that information that all the full-time people receive gets passed along to the part-time folks can be a challenge. So we just try to spread as much information as we can. This is something Susan and I and about 10 other people looked at a few years ago. So let me open this document. The Dean of Developmental Education at the time was interested in seeing or having a glance at all of the different possible placements at CCBC after a student took the placement test. So what reading level were they placed? What English level were they placed? What math level were they placed? So she had, enlarge this a little bit. She had reached out to the research office and asked them to compile data. So how many people fall into this level of reading, this level of English, this level of math? There's so many different possible placements that students can receive among the three areas. So created these spreadsheets to sort of map out all the different possible placements and how many students are falling into those categories. So over a year or over a semester, do we have 2 or 3 students that are full-time placing into Reading 052, English 051, and Math 081? Or are we talking about hundreds of people placing in this sequence of developmental courses? So these are just pages and pages and pages of all the different possible placements. And then we sat down with advisors to create a little tool that was placed on their computer. Let me see, I just have to download it. Okay, good, it worked. We called it R3 Advising. So this has to get updated every single year. Even right now, our math placements and our placement scores of what materials in our developmental math courses is changing, it seems, on a yearly basis. So this is something that has to be examined every year. But an advisor can indicate that a student placed into Reading 052, placed into English 052, and placed into Math 081. And then this tool, based on feedback from everyone who participated in these discussions and the advisors, produces recommendations for a full-time and a part-time student. So as they're advising at CCBC, they only have advising contact, unfortunately, that first semester. They're required to sit down with an advisor after the placement test. After that, they have to seek advising out. That first time where students are meeting with an advisor, this gives them some guidance on what they might recommend. So do they recommend out? Do they recommend AMP? In this case, AMP isn't even listed on either side. So the full-time student, they're recommended to take ALP and Math 081. The part-time student is recommended to take Math 081. So there are going to be cases, depending on feedback from people all across the college, where ALP might be recommended, AMP might be recommended, both might be recommended.
So that pretty much answered, I think there were some questions that talked about how do you work with full-time versus part-time students. What we'd like to do for the next 45 minutes or so, the reason we have you in your district's community college is to now talk collectively about how you can envision this working. So we have some handouts. Oh, please.
Sorry, I just wanted to jump in real quick. As you're thinking about how to take ALP to the high school level, I think one of the important considerations is what subject matter you're doing it with. For math, as you know, high school students aren't required to take a fourth year of math, so it's pretty easy, I think, to take math and bring it down. There's room in the curriculum. You can figure out which strategy you're going to use. With English, however, we want to be careful to not jeopardize the students' possibility of graduating high school if they don't pass a higher level class. So we want to make sure that we're challenging our students with these opportunities, but not setting them up for a situation that they may now not be eligible for high school graduation. So I think one very simple strategy that can be used at the high school level for English would be to have English for, like, you have an English 4 class, that would be the support class, the ALP part, plus the dual enrollment class. So they'd have to have the two double periods. I don't think they'll be able to do like a tutoring model or the technology model or some of those other kinds of approaches. I think for English, you're going to want to make sure that you have both, just to ensure that high school students graduate also. So as we take some of the work that's been done at the college level, there'll be some of those nuances that you'll have to figure out how to make it work at the high school level. So, do you have any other directions for them or no?
So as a group, we'd like you to take a look. The first part of the worksheet just asks you to think about the model that you think is going to work best. I know you had a little kind of precursor to that before lunch. Who are the key partners? So a little bit more of what we just did in the activity. Who are some of your key partners? They could be your champions, your allies, but they also might be your resistors, right? So some of the people who can kind of give you the other perspective so that you can work with that. And then we're going to ask you, what are some of the potential obstacles? Right? Maybe it's funding, maybe it's transportation to get the students to the college or to get the staff to the high school, and what are some potential solutions? So just to kind of think about that first. And then on the back of the worksheet, we want you to actually really create your to-do list. What are you going to do now from this point on? We're asking you to kind of think about the time frame, who would be involved in that, what are you actually going to be able to do now? And it might not be implementation this year, but maybe it's planning for implementation next year. Or maybe for some of us, it's thinking about doing it this spring or even in the summer, because you're working with your community colleges. And summer 1 usually starts in May, right? And summer 2 is usually July and August. So there's still some time to implement for this academic year. And myself and our team will be walking around to kind of help you reimagine how this can work now that you're talking about it in your districts. We'll give you the next 45 minutes to do that. Thank you.